Hi, good morning, everybody. So we'll get the Slido up on here. And we'll start with a couple of questions, some good talking points in there. I like to get kind of right to the heart of things for people that know me. And you guys are also going to be in working sessions after this. And so I want to dig into a little bit of like tactical and practical kind of steps and advice from these two on the stage. And my first question is to Cory. And you talk a little bit about here how we have to get the wins, and that we've got some great strengths here, and there's the ecosystem that's working together, lots of ingredients. So if you're going to have one ask that you could have fulfilled from this room today in order to say this is going to be one thing that could have the biggest impact in moving your organization or the Health City Initiative and putting Edmonton on the map when it comes to being globally recognized for our health innovation, what would that be?
Connections to the problems. So I'll share an example from outside of health where a very large organization that you would all know the name of, or you'd all recognize, basically said to us, hey, we could just open up our data lake to you. And you can throw your data scientists at it, and you could just do some AI. And we turned them down because it has this fundamental misunderstanding. Without the problem, you can't do anything. What we need is connections to the clinicians, the researchers that have actual problems. So then we can go out and say, okay, you know what? Based on that, we might need this particular data set. And we can go back and I would, organizations like Health City, I think, can probably help the startup community to be able to bridge that gap and work through the system there. But it's really that two-step process of, number one, connections to the problems before you can even talk about data.
And so what is standing in the way of the connections to the problems? Is it people, process, time?
You know what? It's crazy because I've spent a lot of time at the U of A over the last couple of years. We need to know all the profs within Comp Sci on a first-name basis, right? That's where we're getting our talent. And when I go to medicine and dentistry, they have no idea what's happening 500 meters away. It's almost like there's this gigantic divide between the two areas of campus. And so a lot of people don't realize that Amy, the machine learning lab that is really the biggest reason why we're on the map for AI/ML in Edmonton, they've just spun off. They've been getting more resources. There's a group of people involved in the steering committee trying to get even more resources to really double down on it. Having that first conversation and being able to take that first step and even prototype out where you think there's some solutions, I think there's easy wins if we can actually move there. But we should have dozens of different problems on the on the product roadmap, not just there are bright spots. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to be too negative, but
right, absolutely, yeah. There's obviously lots happening here, and Reid, you were saying that you're seeing some of that in kind of peeking into our province and our view of winter here. And so you've had the successes. You talked about some of the things that are needed, and you talked about the silos. So maybe even in response to what Cory was saying, what would be your suggestion? How have you been able to bring all those different interdisciplinary groups together, breaking down some of those silos and having that success? Oh, yeah, we need a mic.
Well, I think it's just meeting with as many people as you can. We know that there's a lot of organizations out there that need to be connected with each other, and I think CDIC works to be one of those intermediary organizations that can connect both public and private stakeholders together. We know that there's other organizations like that. It's also about finding out who the big technology players are, who the big pharmaceutical players are in your local area, and also in your national and international collaborations. Go to a lot of conferences and meet with a bunch of different people, and that's how you kind of get started and learn from other people and bring people together.
So things like we're doing here this morning.
Exactly.
Amazing. Okay.
It's the first step.
And if you have any questions from the audiences, please raise your hand and we'll bring you a mic. There was a question that... Oh, that's my hair. Or maybe it's like all the hairspray in it or something. Okay. I'll go with this one on the bottom. How do we improve the ability for ML firms to acquire access to health data given privacy requirements?
So I think that there's a lot that can be done with secondary use data where there's less issues. I think that Alberta Innovates has talked a lot about the ethics and trying to streamline that process. This is obviously a major concern, and it's something that needs to be addressed with, but I think that's part of the framework in terms of if we can have the right sandboxes to play in, if we can have the larger organizations that can actually lay out the rules of the road, I think there's still a lot of potential, and I think you can start off on some of the problems that are maybe a little bit less contentious. Any project we go into, whether it's with a financial institution or utility, we're always stripping out as much personally identifiable information as possible and anonymizing so that there's not even the chance to be able to have a data breach or have an issue on the side with the data. Personally, I think a lot of those problems are actually a lot less than people realize. The issues around data bias are actually far more important and frankly misunderstood by most people in terms of it's a garbage in, garbage out problem. So we're actually focused on the wrong thing. We can get an easy solution to the access to the data or pick the right problems and have the right platforms and governance rules in place there. But over the long run, we need to look at how are we introducing bias or exaggerating bias in the system because of the way we're not acknowledging that data bias to begin with.
Did you want anything to add to that?
Yeah, the whole, just want to expand on the whole garbage in, garbage out that Cory brought up. That's something that we use all the time too. And I think it's people that are entering the administrative data. So the data that you have access to is only good as the processes and people in place that are entering the data in the first place. And I think there's just a lack of connection with the people whose job it is to collect and enter the data and the people who are doing the research with it. And I think if, in terms of, we had a seat at the table when it comes to building the electronic health medical records that you use that we would upload to the administrative data sets, and how important it is to collect data and kind of work with them to see like what are the barriers for them to make sure that they're entering in the data in a timely fashion, and that way we can get a lot more accurate data and kind of reduce that bias.
A question, and it was up there a little bit, and I might paraphrase, but given the work that you guys have done at the CDIC, where do you guys fit when it comes to the rest of the global ecosystems out there and the work that you're doing? Did you guys do research and talk to other global organizations, communities as they pulled this together? And therefore, you know, are there some things that you have seen or done that you would say, make sure you avoid these things? You talked about some of the ways that you led to success, but.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we learned from talking to other like-minded researchers, people that we meet at international conferences or even just at local or national events. Yeah. It's basically about having your funding come from a multiple different sources, because you don't want to, sometimes grant funding might dry up or industry funding might be hard to get because your research interests don't align at certain points. So I think just having your hands in both pots as much as possible so you don't ever run out of money, and you need the money to be able to do the research that you want to do to impact lowering the healthcare costs, improving patient care, and all the rest of it. So that would be the one thing we took away from that.
So then, a question for Cory on that access to capital piece of it, and we've talked about it or heard about it here this morning. So your experiences, what's being done here, what would be, again, the ask to the audience in order to have that access to capital, or do we have it here and we're good?
I'll start with one story on a company that, they're not from Edmonton, but it's Western Canada, and I think demonstrates an issue that we have, which is all about mindset. Health-related startup, they were going to go out and raise a couple $100,000, limp along on a few grants, right? But they had this amazing prototype. And it was funny, with this investor group that I was in, an American was at the table and said, "You guys are insane. This company should go out and raise $5 million and shoot for the moon. We think too small." And that is a mindset. That is, I don't know if we say it's a Canadian thing. You know what? It's good that we have some humbleness here, and we don't want to be arrogant, fine, but we need a little bit more swagger. So with that context, I think, you know, the funding is hasn't been great over the last few years. I think partly because we've had it so good within oil and gas that there's been no need for us to actually go into a lot of the innovation sections. And the networks of trust that exist in oil and gas need to be transferred over into health and into technology. But things are changing. Christina's in the middle here of the table, has been with Valhalla, with the largest angel investment group in Western Canada, has a Sprout fund for early stage stuff. You'll hear from Dornouche later with Meadow.ai. She raised a bunch of money, now not in Alberta, but you don't have to raise it here. She raised it in starting the company here, right? I would say that there's organizations like Creative Destruction Labs, that CDL Rockies in Calgary is all focused on Western Canada, and those are all Albertan investors. So there is money here, but then I would also point, you've got an access, for those entrepreneurs in the room that are looking for it, I'll plug your work, actually, to be frank. I mean, you're going to have to go to Toronto, you're going to have to go to the Valley, but I don't want to embarrass you or anything, but Joanne's got a great group in terms of the soft landing in the Valley and her connections to be able to tie in. So there's no reason, whenever I hear that capital is the excuse, I just think it's a little bit of BS. Like, I think it's there. It's just, you need to have a different mindset, and you might need to go a little bit further to get it.
So a little bit more hustle, a little bit bigger idea and thinking big. It's interesting because in working with Alberta companies now, with one of the projects that I have with the government, I talk to different entrepreneurs here, and they say, I've gone and I've gotten money from, I won't name a name, and I haven't gotten money there, but I see somebody else who is like me but different, and they've gotten money, and then they've gotten follow-on money and more follow-on money. So a lot of it is what I'm hearing is about sort of comes back to people and relationships, and it's an inconsistency in that the access to some of it, and I don't know if that is. The products are entirely different with it. I don't know if we've got to look at building more relationships more deeply in this ecosystem here.
We need to bridge those networks of trust, right? They exist in real estate, they exist in oil and gas, and it's the disease. I mean, we've had it too good for too long, not a few years notwithstanding, right?
Yeah.
The money's there, right? And I mean, I could name you 3 families that are 100 million plus families in Edmonton right now that would happily invest. They almost put the health into their philanthropy bucket, right? Like, they'll back a young entrepreneur in the health just because they want to support Alberta, right? But that trust needs to be built in order for that first investment to be made.
Can you speak to building trust, since you've talked about breaking down silos and having the multidisciplinary?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the data realm, I found that a lot of data providers, they're very apprehensive about giving up control of the whole process. And what that does is it really hurts research, because it involves a lot of unnecessary delays. And I think, we have a committee going on right now to try to streamline that process, bring all the data providers together to try to centralize the process so they can put some trust in a centralized institution to have the interests at heart, as long as, like Cory was saying before, we already have anonymization algorithms, so the risk of breaching privacy is actually very low. It's more about, the quality of the data that we should be looking at. And I think, once they kind of see what their data is used for, and what kind of stuff it does to change policy and to improve patient care, then I think that's what's going to get the needle moving in terms of people getting out of their silos and giving up their a little bit more control and have more trust in the centralized process.
And I think I was reading somewhere, and Christina will give you the mic. I think it might have been on your LinkedIn that I just looked at, about we do business with people we like or trust. And we have a sort of saying in the Valley of know, like, trust, refer. And it has to be in that order. And so you've got to build relationships and build that trust in order to be able to work together. Christina?
To raise capital based on quality of the company?
Sure. And
that'd be great. Thanks.
Quick repeat of the question in short form.
Christine is also talking about the quality, and I think that ties in some of the comments we had beforehand in that whether it's an education piece or, I'm not so sure that you can have, I might respectfully have a different viewpoint on, I'm not sure if you can necessarily teach that scientist all the entrepreneurial skills. I would say put together the right team. If you have the right team of different people, then you've got an opportunity, right? So the quality we have here, I've heard from VCs and angels like Christina that the quality here is not quite up to par of where you might see in the Vancouvers and the Torontos, never mind the Valley, right? And so I think it's mentorship there, right? It's a chicken and egg problem where because you don't have a huge ecosystem in the space, there aren't as many people to help bring that through. And how do you get through that? I think it's just a matter of being able to really reach out and try to build those networks and try to find someone who can help you along in terms of what an investor is going to be looking for, right? And I'm an associate with CDL Rockies, and there's 30 companies that come into that every year. Of that, we saw 3 from Edmonton, right? And it was about 20 from Calgary and the rest from the U.S. So there's work to be done there for sure. I think the quality of the science is as good here as anywhere. It's just packaging it in the right way.
Thanks. And if you give me another 30 minutes, I'll totally talk about that and my opinions on it. So I wanted to put this next question up. How do we address the privacy risks and proactively create an environment and or educate the public about the benefits of the healthcare data use?
Yeah, I think what happens is sometimes there are privacy breaches, and they get really amplified in the media, but they're really just the minority of what actually goes on. And I think just being more transparent about our methods and what we do and why the risk of breaching privacy for administrative data research is so minimal, and what the value that comes out of it, and just balance the whole risk-reward thing. The risk is very low, but the rewards can be very high. And we already put a lot of trust in with our data with technology companies and going to see our doctors in the first place, and really just researchers accessing this data and not knowing who you are and making conclusions based on population-level data sets. We just got to explain that a lot better to the lay public so they understand what the risk is going to be, so they're not concerned like, oh, what are you using my data for?
Right. We are out of time.
No,
Yeah.
we've got till
okay.
10 minutes, if you're okay.
Oh, well, sure.
I think
Somebody needs to reset this.
Yeah, he
there
needs
we
to
go.
reset that. Just on your last comment, Reid, around the data, you mentioned earlier on that you work extensively with patient groups that give you feedback. Has that come up at all? Any conversation around data use amongst them in terms of issues or questions that needed to be clarified?
It has, but I think once we let them know that why we're collecting the data we're collecting, what steps we're taking to address privacy concerns, I think it puts them at ease really quickly. So I think people will be reasonable as long as you just explain to them, exactly what you're doing and why.
Other questions? See, I feel like one of the problems is many people don't truly understand what machine learning is, so they don't know how it can help them. How do we demystify this?
There's, as the general population, yeah, that is an issue. But really, I think I would actually rephrase it and say, if we build the right tools, we need to actually convince the clinicians that there's ways to make their jobs better, to improve results, and to improve patient care, right? And I think it's an education more on that side than to the general public. Frankly, once we build these tools that are used as part of our existing processes, I don't think patients will really care as long as they get better results. And again, this is not everybody thinks of the personalized medicine of your data being out there. There's so many use cases that don't even touch the edge, right? They're part of the process within that internally is already being done that we can improve. And so over time, this is going to be less and less of an issue. I think almost we've gone to the extreme where, and maybe China's not the greatest example because there's lots, there's two extremes, right? But if China's got one extreme on this side, and then we've gone to the full, right? There's a happy medium somewhere in there, right? But what happens when some of the, all the breakthroughs are happening not in North America, but they're happening on the other side of the ocean, just because they've taken a totally different mindset in terms of saying, not how do we restrict all this data from the onset, as opposed to saying, how do we actually build better tools as a result of this new emerging technology? How do we reinvent business processes and processes within healthcare because of this new emerging technology?
Do we sometimes overcomplicate things and look at, like, we talked a little bit about, you know, kind of trying to boil the ocean sometimes with this? Like, is there part of it where we just need to kind of break this down and do some simple steps versus trying to think about how we do all of the steps to the end goal?
Agreed. I mean, if we talk about saying, hey, we're going to open up all the data within AHS, that's never going to happen. And we're going to start on this 3 or 4 year project. And then by the time we get there in 4 years, we're going to say, well, wait a minute, I don't need that data, I need this data. It comes back to, if we start with the actual problem first, I think there's a lot less data that we actually need to open up. So if you have a very specific, narrow question that you're looking to solve, I think you can be more targeted about that, the approach of getting access to that data. And then once we get some wins, that will help to change culture internally within the system and then within the general population.
Yeah. We have a question up here. It's one for Cory, but I'm going to ask you, Reid, a question. Are there other entities in Canada or globally that you're working with? I know our next panelist we've got a couple of global speakers working in other international ecosystems, and I'm curious as to whom you guys are all working with, in addition to your new work you're going to do with Health City, of course.
Yes. Well, no, we're still young, and we're still looking for many different collaborators to work with. A lot of the people that we work with are different academic institutions across the country. We've collaborated with University of British Columbia on a clinical trial. We've collaborated with the Canadian Institute for Health Information on building economic models in terms of predicting cost effectiveness for different modalities for treating kidney failure. We've worked with also people in the U.S., like the National Kidney Foundation has been interested in our economic expertise for their models, and obviously lots of different pharmaceutical and dialysis technology companies. We're still kind of at the early stages in working with machine learning. We're not quite there yet. It's something that we would definitely like to look into a lot further. But we are working with Equal, which is a technology startup in Ontario, to help with our home monitoring, which basically follows patients when they go home to monitor them with a Fitbit, a scale, an oximeter, and a blood pressure machine, and that will we can monitor them from home, so we can kind of see things that might happen before they happen, and that way they don't have to go into the hospital, which is a very costly process and something that we want to avoid as much as possible.
Yeah. Good.
So right now, if you look at comp sci at the U of A machine learning, basically, I'd say, don't quote me on these numbers, but call it 90% are international students coming in, and it's China, Iran, and the Russian bloc that are the masters and the PhDs that are coming in. They are far less likely to be able to get an HB1 work visa in the US. There's a huge opportunity for Canada, because of the policy in the US, to seize some of the most brilliant minds from around the world who want to come here and become new Canadians. And so if anything, who I think we can learn from is when we look to Ontario and Quebec, they're kicking our butt. Toronto last year, it was reported they created more jobs in tech than San Francisco and Seattle combined, right? Montreal's had billions of dollars of investment because of AI/ML, and has created over 1,000 jobs just in this last year that are high-paying, well into the six-figure jobs right in downtown Montreal. So the big difference that we're seeing is that the province has really doubled down and got behind those industries, or this industry. We're part of the Pan-Canadian AI strategy. There was $125 million that was split between Montreal, Toronto, and Edmonton. Well, it wasn't split. We got 25 of that 120. We got 25 million of the 125.
Wow.
So we're losing the battle politically,
Wow.
And we're not getting the funding. And then the second that funding was announced, Quebec doubled down with a $100 million investment, and Ontario did the same not too far afterwards, right? So this will result in job creation and wealth creation, but we've got this asset that we need to seize because the world's passing us by. It's not, our research excellence won't last forever.
Yes.
My apologies for the rant, but
Yeah.
if there's someone to learn, we can learn from our own country.
Well,
We don't need to go to the other side of the world. We can
yeah.
just look east.
This is a question I'm going to actually open it up to the audience to have everybody's answers because, how can Edmonton really win? How can Edmonton be seen globally as a top place for health innovation and for other innovation? And, when I'm in the U.S. and I tell people I'm from Canada, they say, oh, Toronto or Vancouver. When I'm in the Valley and I say I'm from Canada, they say, oh, Toronto, Waterloo, Montreal. And I say I'm from Alberta, and of course nobody knows where that is. And so I'm just going to ask. I have my opinions, and a lot of people in this room know them, as to what can we do in order to really put Edmonton on the map. More funding from government, doubling down,
no.
industry.
Well, no, and I think the government enables them on the back end. But what we need is we need commercial success, and I
Okay.
think commercial success will support the academic side of it and everything else. But within health specifically, can we build something here with? It's an export mindset. Can we improve patient outcomes in Alberta, save some money here on the health system, but with a mindset to building applications that we sell to the rest of the world, right? That means we improve the results or the lives of Albertans, but you need to have the money to come in to fund. I mean, there needs to be a commercial outcome there one way or another, right? Yeah. And once you actually establish from that point, that's what I think is going to attract the money.
Yeah.
The money's not dumb.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm probably going to ask the same question
Yeah.
I'm going to ask. And by the way, Dave Hamill, I am an immigrant from somewhere else, here
Hello.
now.
Welcome.
But the T word, is it talent? Because capital, as I understand it, is broadly available. There's bags of capital out there in Canada, be it from individual families or organizations or venture capitalists, angels, etc. And I spent, for my sins, a lot of time in the Valley, ex-Microsoft. We used to stand at the gates of the universities before the Sergey and Brins turned up, and Google became a major competitor for us. So is it talent? I mean, I'm trying to get at the root issue here. What's the issue for this connovation to do what it needs to do, to grow its GDP, to develop into diverse areas? We've got great schools. 2 of our kids have been through them. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they've gone somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Much to our chagrin, but...
And so why did they go somewhere else?
better opportunities.
A job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So there is not a single graduate from machine learning and comp sci that is unemployed. I would be absolutely shocked if there was one of the graduates over the last 5 years who's not found a job somewhere. So the talent is here. This is why it's such a unique thing. We don't have to attract them to the subarctic. They're already here. It's retention. I completely agree with the retention comment beforehand. And the retention comes because there's jobs and opportunities to build a life.
We're out of time, but okay, go ahead.
Sorry,
She's the boss.
to the point. I think you're right. I absolutely agree. And you're talking about touting success. One of the things that biotech and health sciences, I think we have a big tough time, especially in a 280 character universe, is to tell our stories and to tout our successes. You talked about humility. I think that's a big deal. If we're going to be talking about going out there and looking for investment in terms of swagger, we have to brag about what we've done and about the companies that we've helped who are models of talent, that it is world-class talent that you have here, and to be able to show that to the world, to tell those stories. And I think we do that largely poorly.
Yeah, and the reason why Waterloo is on everybody's map in the Valley is because they've been in the Valley for decades, and so they are consistently there. And I sort of argue a little bit about the quality that's in Alberta. We brought 19 companies from Alberta down to the Valley in November. There wasn't one of the 30 people that I put them in front of in the Valley that said that they sucked. Not one of them said that those 19 companies sucked. So we've got good ideas here. I think there is a bit of broadening of thinking that has to be looked at here with it, because when they come to the Valley and places like that, they're embraced and people are connecting them into capital, they're connecting them into mentors, advisors, they're connecting them into industry. And not all 19, but we don't need all 19. We need a couple of those. And then to the point that was said earlier, if we have that here, we will attract people to come up here to work with us, to put money into us, to be our customers up here. Sorry, I rambled too. So that concludes this session.